the topic is industrial organization, which is a theory of how firms behave and also the structure of markets, the types of markets. So this is, again, about the behavior of firms. In particular, how much they produce, how many inputs they use, how they price their products, and their behavior is different in different types of markets. Okay? So, um, this is, well, in a market, there's like the supply side, the producers, the firms usually, and then the demand side, usually consumers. And a lot about the differences between markets has to do with the differences on the supply side. And we talk about a handful of different types of markets. I've listed those here. These are some major types. Okay, starting with competitive markets. Okay, competitive markets are this is one basic model we have. Let me put this a different way. These are sort of four basic general types of markets. And realistically, markets won't be exactly any one of these, but they will be more similar to one than to another. Okay, just a second. Okay, so I've tried to improve the lights in the room so people can see better. Again, like what happens in a market has a lot to do with the supply side of the market. And we have these four major models of what markets might look like. And the reality is, any real market will be similar to one of these, but not exactly a perfect example of any of these. So we start with competitive markets. A competitive market is one with many sellers of an identical product. Okay? And there's free entry and exit into the marketplace. So many sellers of an identical product, maybe think of the gasoline market. Okay? Imagine yourself as a consumer in these examples. The gasoline market. If you need to fill up gas in your car, there are many stations all selling an identical product. Got it? Okay, or when purchasing, when purchasing rice or some other like common staple, common food. I mean, there are multiple producers of rice, and they're probably all virtually indistinguishable to you. Now, when, I'm thinking like that's you at the grocery store. Even more generally, if we think of the rice farmers who actually produce that rice, or corn farmers who produce corn, there are many, many farmers selling these products, and they are all identical. Okay, there are sort of standard definitions of what different types of rice are, what different types of corn are, what different types of milk are, and many, many, many producers. Okay, so many sellers, identical product, free entry and exit in the long run. Okay, so in the long run, anyone could decide to open a gas station, or anyone who has a gas station can close it. Okay, another example that I'll talk about is maybe the market for milk. Okay, so milk is a fairly standardized product. You know what happens when you go to the grocery store. You see a choice of about 5 kinds of milk that are differentiated in terms of milk fat content and whether they're organic, right? That's all there is to it. And it comes from many, many, many farms. And the farmers each produce some quantity of milk. They sell it to a distributor who then brings it to the grocery stores. But again, it's virtually in the different products from different farms is virtually indistinguishable to you as the consumer. Okay, free entry and exit. anyone can open a dairy farm. Anyone can shut down a dairy farm. Okay. Now, in a competitive market, sellers will be price takers. They can't set their own prices. A milk farmer, a dairy farmer, cannot demand that his farm gets paid or her farm gets paid an extra $5 per. I think milk is measured in hundredweight, 100 pounds of milk. Can't demand a higher price than what everyone else is like offering their milk for sale at. There's a going price. The same for gas stations. One gas station can't raise its price above what the competitors are offering, or else the customers will just all switch to the competitor. They can find the gas from someone else cheaper if one seller raises their price. So this means sellers are price takers. They sell at the like going rate in the market. The next model we have of a market is the other extreme, a monopoly. A monopoly is a single seller of a unique product. So one company that makes this product. Some of the examples that I bring up of monopolies include De Beers, okay, which has the diamond monopoly. De Beers is economically fascinating. The diamond market itself is fascinating. I've probably ranted about this before, but diamonds are not a particularly rare stone. Now, they are far more common than you would think, or than you are led to believe, or how common they are in the market. In other words, they're more common in the earth than they are in the market. This is because there is a single company that has really controlled most of the diamond industry, at least until 10 or 20 years ago. De Beers is losing its grip on the diamond market, but until 20 years ago, it controlled about 80% of the diamond market, and it would restrict how many diamonds it sold in order to keep the prices high. Okay. In fact, I can go off into all kinds of little tangents. You all know who F. Scott Fitzgerald is? Writer. You know him most best for The Great Gatsby. He's got another short novel or long short story called A Diamond the Size of the Ritz. Okay, no one knows this, correct? Nolan, you do. Have you read it? Okay. It's a story about some rancher in Wyoming or somewhere who, on his market, has discovered that he's got a hill that is one solid diamond. And this makes him, in some ways, the wealthiest person in the world. He has a diamond the size of the Ritz Hotel. In some ways, this makes him the wealthiest person in the world because he's got a giant, giant diamond. On the other hand, if he were ever to sell it, diamonds would become worthless. And that's the paradox of the story. Again, you sell this giant diamond, then diamonds become worthless. That's essentially the idea behind De Beers. They have this giant stockpile of diamonds, but if they were to sell diamonds, it would make them worth considerably less. Okay. So De Beers has this fascinating monopoly. Other examples of monopolies include some medications. I talked about, for example, EpiPens. Okay, or epinephrine autoinjectors. Okay, And for a long time, a single company, Mylan, was the sole producer of these epinephrine auto-injectors. Okay, these are things that inject epinephrine, which reverses severe allergic reactions automatically into people who are and like save the lives of people who are having severe allergic reactions. Okay, it's an important thing, an important device to have if you are concerned about allergies. And again, for a long time, there's a single producer. Now, there's the second producer, AVIQ. What? AVIQ. AVVIQ or something? Okay, AVIQ. Okay, as a competitor. So once AVIQ enters the market, it's no longer a monopoly. It is, in fact, something that we call I'll come to that in a minute, an oligopoly, where there are a few sellers of a single product. Anyhow, traditionally, EpiPens were a monopoly. And other drug companies have monopolies on their new patented drugs, like brand new drugs. Okay, let's see. So monopolies, again, it's a monopolist is a single seller of their product. They're the only one who can sell that. And they get to set the price. That's an important thing for a monopolist. They get to determine how much they want to charge for this good, and they face a trade-off. Like basically, the demand curve says that if they lower their price, they will get more customers, but they're getting less per customer. And so there's this trade-off between, do we lower the price to bring in more customers or raise the price even though we lose some customers? Okay, that's the decision that a monopolist has to make. Okay, they are a price setter, though setting the price, there's the trade-off of losing customers. And the final thing is no entry into the market. Okay? You cannot enter into the market and compete with a monopolist. For example, you cannot start competing in the diamond market unless you have a diamond mine of your own. Again, it's no free entry into the market. You cannot start producing EpiPens on your own. Only Mylan can do that. Okay, so there are reasons why people cannot, or new firms cannot enter the market. Next type of firm or type of market is called monopolistic competition. And this is somewhere in between a competitive market and a monopoly. Okay? It is a market with a few sellers of similar but distinct products. Okay? And a key in this market is product differentiation. The one good example would be the market for smartphones. Okay. What companies manufacture and sell smartphones? Yeah. Apple is the easy one. Okay, did all other hands go down at that point? Go ahead. Samsung. Yeah. LG. I don't know. Let's see. Okay. Um, who makes Androids? Does Google make their own? Yeah. Okay. So Any other manufacturers? I mean, that's probably it. Or those are like the major ones. They sell. There are a few sellers of similar but distinct products. Okay, and they are in competition with each other, even though, sort of, on the one hand, Apple has a monopoly on selling iPhones, and Google has a monopoly on selling their Androids. Okay, these monopolies are in competition with each other. Okay, so that's how this model is kind of a combination of the competition model and the monopoly model. As I said, a key thing is product differentiation. Okay, the companies try to compete on differences between their products as well as price. Okay, so Apple will emphasize the features of its latest phone, and try to set it apart from the competitors. Okay, so product differentiation is a key characteristic of a market with monopolistic competition. Another good example is the market for automobiles. Okay. And we could list, the sellers in these markets. Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, um, Toyota, Honda, Nissan, a few others, right? So there are a few sellers. They sell similar products, but distinct, like different. Um, their products are not exactly the same, and they emphasize their differences. Like our sedan has 6 cup holders, whereas the competitor's sedan has only 5 cup holders. Our sedan is rated number 1 in safety in 6 categories. The competitor is rated number 1 in 6 other categories. I mean, so again, they talk about the differences between them and try to highlight the differences in their products. This is a way of avoiding competing on price. The only thing that Apple and Samsung are competing on to like bring in customers is price, they're sort of defeating themselves. They're lowering their price in order to bring in more customers. The alternative is to set themselves apart with features that attract more customers. And again, that's the idea of that product differentiation is a way of bringing in customers. Okay, now, other characteristics of monopolistic competition: free entry and exit. There are no barriers to entering the market. Anyone could, with the technology and manufacturing capabilities, anyone could sell smartphones. Any firm could start manufacturing and selling vehicles. There are no barriers to entering the market the way that, like, with a diamond, in the diamond market, you need to own a diamond mine. And if you can't get your hands on a diamond mine because De Beers owns all the diamond mines in the world, you just can't enter the market. Or you can't enter the market and sell some patented or trademarked good or copyrighted good. That's against the law. Okay, so those are the monopoly market. There's no free entry into the market. Here I'm talking about monopolistic competition. New companies can enter the market. Another example of monopolistic competition: the fashion industry. Okay. When you buy clothes, there are a handful of places where you could buy them or companies that could manufacture them. Imagine the olden days when we went to shopping malls. There were stores that you could visit, and they sold like items, clothing that competed with one another, and they were similar, but they all had their own distinct style to them. Okay? And let's see, anyone could enter the fashion market, start manufacturing clothes. You know, and then, okay, so that's this idea of free entry and exit. Okay, final characteristic, price setters. All of these companies have some ability to set their price, to control their price, but they've got a couple of things to keep in mind. One is how close are the substitutes in the market, as well as how many customers do I lose when I raise the price. Okay, okay. So final type of market, oligopoly. Okay, so oligo is a word root meaning few, though the only other word I know that with this root is oligarchy. It refers to a government by a few people. A monarchy is a government by one person. Oligarchy is a government by a few people. Similarly, in economics, monopoly is a market with a single seller. Oligopoly is a market with a few sellers of an identical product. Okay. So when it comes to these epinephrine auto-injectors, there was previously one producer of EpiPens. Mylan produced EpiPens. That's a trademark. And oh shoot, I forget who produces the Alvi-Q. Okay, I mean here we have two producers of a product that is almost the same. Or let's see, another example. These are not quite perfect, but sometimes the market for colas is used as an example of two sellers of an identical product, more or less. Who are the two sellers of colas? Pepsi and Coke. Okay. Now, whether this is an oligopoly or monopolistic competition kind of depends on whether you think Coke and Pepsi taste the same or not. Okay, another example of oligopoly might be the market for COVID vaccinations or COVID vaccines. Okay. A few sellers, right? Who are the sellers of COVID vaccines? Yeah. Pfizer and Moderna and Johnson and Johnson. Oh no. Well, okay, so Johnson & Johnson is off the list now. Okay, so Pfizer and Moderna. That's an easier comparison. Okay. For all practical purposes, are they the same? Yeah. Nova, Novavax or Novavax? Okay. Yeah. Now, there are some others in the works or have recently been approved. The two big ones, let's just say, those are Pfizer and Moderna, correct? And for most practical purposes, they are identical products, correct? They are two-shot mRNA, whatever that means, two-shot mRNA vaccines with same efficacy rates and so forth. Yeah? Okay, that would be a great example of an oligopoly. And like specifically, sometimes we call it a duopoly. Guess what duopoly means? Yeah. What? Two sellers, yeah. Um, two sellers. Okay, it's called a duopoly, but it's a type of oligopoly, a few sellers. Okay, so going back to oligopoly, few sellers, an identical product. Again, think of the COVID vaccinations, the COVID mRNA vaccinations. No entry, that's kind of a question mark. In some cases, there may be barriers to entry. In other cases, there may not. I mean, at this point, FDA approval is a barrier to entering the vaccination market. Okay, and price setters, that's complicated. There's some ability to set price, but there's some ability to set price for oligopolists. But they lose customers if they raise their price. They gain customers when they reduce their price, like gain customers from their competitor. And price setting behavior becomes strategic. Yeah. This is, this is a reason why economists like to talk about the market for colas. Okay. During the 1980s, okay, there were the great cola wars. Okay. Pepsi and Coke were locked in competition with each other, each trying to undercut their competitor, bring down their price, have a new advertising campaign, do whatever they could to bring in new customers. Okay, behavior in oligopoly markets becomes very strategic. Okay, and I think that's the main thing to emphasize. Okay, so yeah.
Is the main difference between monopolistic competition and oligopoly? Is it like the product differentiation?
Is,
Because a lot of the characteristics seem to be the same except for that barriers to entry.
right. So the question is whether the difference between oligopoly and monopolistic competition is product differentiation. That is pretty much the exact difference. Yeah, both of them are markets with a few sellers. When the product is exactly identical, behavior becomes very strategic, especially in terms of price setting behavior and quantities produced. Um, when it's monopolistic competition, when there are differences between the products, the companies try to play up those differences as much as possible. And that's why, like as I said at the start, no market is really perfectly any of these. But you can imagine that if the different COVID vaccine companies were competing, they are like, if this were a market for vaccines and customers get to decide which vaccine they want to purchase, we'd have commercials on TV where Pfizer and Moderna are talking about 95% efficacy, um, uh, fewer blood clots than the leading competitors. Meanwhile, Johnson and Johnson would be saying, but it's only one shot and you're over, plus our side effects aren't as bad. Okay, they'd be running commercials trying to emphasize the differences between their products in order to bring in more customers. Okay, and to convince customers that customers should be willing to pay a premium for their product. To answer your question, And I'm blanking on your name. Natalie. Okay, Natalie, to sort of address your question, whenever there are a few sellers in a market, like a market for an oligopoly, they will be tempted to try to differentiate their products. Does that make sense? And make their products seem different from their competitors. So they would like to switch from being an oligopoly to being monopolistic competition. Another example of oligopoly, the oldest one, has to do with bottled water. And bottled water is a fairly identical product, except if you turn on the TV and start watching commercials, I don't know, Fiji will try to convince you that their water is somehow different from other companies. Or, I laugh almost when I see Deer Springs or Poland Springs or some of Deer Park. Some of these companies, bottled water companies, advertising water that is essentially just pure water. Right? There's no real difference, but they want to make you think there is a difference between their products, that somehow their product comes from special water sources. Or companies start putting vitamins into their water or adjusting the alkalinity of their water, trying to convince you it is somehow different and you should be willing to pay a premium for it. Okay? So that's sort of like start out with an identical product. You would benefit from convincing your customers that it's not identical and trying to differentiate it. Um, so does that address your question? Okay, so I've talked about these different types of markets. At this point, I want to talk about firms and our model of the behavior of firms. Can you all see that? Okay. Um, yeah, I apologize. Okay. Firms. As far as economists are concerned, the behavior of firms is pretty simple. And we have a firm, inputs go in, and outputs come out. The firm is just simply an organization for doing that conversion. What we don't care much about is what happens inside the firm, like how exactly the technology works. That is rarely the topic of interest. Okay, we're interested in firms' production. Okay? Again, that's about converting inputs into outputs. And then that relates to the inputs used, the output produced. Um, and then, following that, the price charged, if the firm can set its price. Okay, so got it? Now, when I say like firms are about converting inputs into outputs, let me maybe give an example. Just think of a simple maybe technology that converts hours of study, okay, into a grade. When I say simple technology, I mean I'm not really going to get into exactly how this works. It might be the case that after 1 hour of studying, you could get 30 on a test. After 2 hours of studying, you could get a grade of 50 on a test. 3 hours of studying will bring you to a 70. Actually, let me do 65. 4 will bring you to a 75. 5 will bring you to an 80. And so forth. Okay. So what I've listed here is just the relationship between input and output. And I hope this very simple model makes some sense to you all. What I am not answering, or what I'm not talking about, is how you do the studying. I don't know. Do you read? Do you recopy your notes? Do you work problems? I don't care, okay, as far as this model goes. It's just about translating inputs into outputs. Each unit of input, an hour of studying, how that translates into output grade. Okay, now, I've written this thing, we call this a production function. The relationship between the input and the output. Okay. And grades, again, are the output. They are produced using studying. One thing that I'll add to this is the increase in the grade from this hour. Okay, and let me add another thing into the table. 0 hours of studying translates into a grade of 0. Okay, so how much does the first hour of study add to your grade? It adds 30 points, right? The second hour of study raises your grade by 20 points. The third hour raises the grade by 15 points, right? Then 10 points, then 5 points. Okay. You see what I'm talking about here? Okay. How much this hour of studying improved your grade, how much it increased your grade. This is called the marginal product. Okay. The marginal product, it's the change in output from one more input, from the additional input. Okay, got it? Okay, so we'll talk more about this later, but again, I want to express this idea of the marginal product. How much this hour of studying increased your grade? Okay, so firms. Again, one of these slides that's hard to see. Inputs go into the firm, outputs come out. The objective of a firm is to maximize profits. Okay. So for the sake of our economic models, that's all the firm cares about, maximizing profits. And that's not a bad approximation to what the objective of most companies is. Most companies just want to make money for their shareholders. As a matter of fact, most corporations regard it as their sole duty is to make money for their shareholders. Okay? Okay, are there other things that a firm could care about? Yeah, maybe. Right? A firm could care about its environmental impact. A firm could care about treating its workers fairly. A firm could have other objectives. But for the sake of this model, we're ignoring all of that and focusing on the primary objective of almost all firms is to maximize profits. And profits are the difference between total revenue and total cost. Okay, so total revenue minus total cost. Okay, total revenue, that's all the money that the firm gets from selling its product. So it's the price of output, P, times the quantity sold, Q. That's total revenue. Very simple. Minus the total costs. Okay, so this is important. Like, that's our basic idea of what these firms and these models are trying to accomplish. There's, on one side, there's revenue they get from selling their product, from selling Q. On the other side are the costs of producing Q, producing that quantity. Okay, so here is like a simple example that I'll use of a production function. So a firm produces widgets, okay, and they figured out how many widgets they could produce in a day. Okay, so they've tried this experiment where they bring in one worker and ask the worker to produce as many widgets as the worker can in a day, and that one worker produces 100 widgets. Okay. Then they bring in two workers and tell them together, produce as many widgets as you all can in a day. And they produce 190. Now, here again, I'm not getting into the details of how they do the production. Do they specialize? Like, does one person handle certain parts of producing the widget, another person other parts? I'm not getting into those questions right now. And that's, like, if you're interested in discussing those topics, that's an advanced course in industrial organization. Okay, again, they bring in two workers, they produce 190. Most likely, two workers will not be able to produce twice as much as one worker for a variety of reasons. But productivity tends to go down. And one reason might be that they are taking turns using some of the same tools. And they have to share. That means sometimes there's a bottleneck waiting for the tools. Or they have to ensure that they maintain a social distance of 6 feet, which means they're sometimes getting into each other's way, and that slows them down. So it's likely that two workers will not be able to produce as much as, or well, will not produce twice what one worker does. And then a third worker contributes even less to total productivity. But they are always increasing productivity. More workers translates into more product. Though, as I've set it up here, each additional worker brings in less. In fact, I can fill that in the table. It's called the marginal product of each worker. Okay? Assuming that this firm makes nothing when it has 0 employees, the first worker increases the output of the firm by 100 widgets. Then when the firm brings in a second worker, the output increases from 100 to 190. Okay? So output increases by 90. Got it? Okay. Going from having 2 workers to 3 workers, the output of the firm increases to 270 from 190. So it increased by 80. From 270 to 340 workers, output increased to 340 from 270. So it increased by 70. Okay, and so forth. So here's my table that has all these numbers worked out. Okay, it's important for you all to understand what marginal product is and how to calculate it. It's the additional output from adding another worker. Okay? Or think to the example of studying for a test. How much an extra hour of studying will raise your grade? Okay? That's marginal product, the extra output from another unit of input. Okay, now one thing that is almost always true for all firms in all situations is diminishing marginal product. Okay, this is almost a law of production at firms. Each additional input contributes less than the one before it. Okay? A little bit goes a long ways. A lot doesn't go as far. Right? Again, think of studying for that test. The first few hours are most productive, and then each extra hour becomes less productive. Does that make sense? If that makes sense, you understand the idea of diminishing marginal product. Again, the first few hours of studying add the most to your grade. And each extra hour, though, raises your grade by less than the hour before it. It's called diminishing marginal product. Sometimes people will refer to this as diminishing returns. Diminishing returns. Sometimes people will call it diminishing marginal returns. Okay. And I've heard a variety of different ways of expressing this idea, but diminishing marginal product. Okay, you get less and less from each input. Okay, this is almost always true in most markets. Variety of reasons why that might be true. One is, sorted by productivity. Think of the workers at my widget factory. If there are different workers in the world who produce different amounts, and that's all there is to it. So workers Ann, Bob, Chris, Dan, E is for Emma. Okay. Ann can produce 80 widgets. Bob can produce 70. Chris can produce 100. Dan, 60. Emma, 90. Okay, they have different productivities. Then if I need to employ one worker at my firm to produce widgets, who do I hire first? Chris, right? So the first worker I employ produces 100 widgets. The second worker I would employ is Emma, right? And she produces 90. And then the third worker is Ann, adds 80. Then Bob adds 70. Then Dan adds 60. And just a matter of sorting the workers by productivity means I hired the most productive workers first. Okay. So as I listed reasons for diminishing marginal product, one reason that the first units produce more than later units is because it's natural for a firm to employ the most productive inputs first. Okay. Second thing is less efficient. Maybe the workers do become less efficient when there are more of them. One thing that I always think about is co-workers are a distraction. Oh. Okay. Co-workers can be a distraction, and when there are lots of us, we talk to each other. We need meetings. The more people who are working together, the more meetings we have. And these are things that could just reduce our efficiency. Okay. Or we might need to have more and more supervisors and people to supervise the supervisors and people to supervise the supervisors of the supervisors. The larger the firm gets, the more like management it requires. And that's those extra workers are like the management workers are not contributing as much. Okay, third thing, the idea of congestion. We might all be trying to use the same resources and be getting in the way of each other. We might all be trying to use the same office printer, and we slow down each other because sometimes your coworker is using the printer, or you know okay, or we're using some other resource that gets congested. Okay, and other reasons, and so forth. So almost always, one or many of these things will be true, and they will contribute to diminishing marginal product at a firm. So now I want to introduce you all to to what Greg Mankiw describes as thinking at the margin. Um, and this is the way that all economists think of what is rational behavior. It is to think along the lines of, or if I'm working at this firm, if I'm running this firm, I'm trying to decide how many workers I want to employ. I think about the costs versus benefits of an additional worker. So, imagine that I can sell these widgets for $1 a piece, and it costs me $75 to employ a worker. So I can just go through these workers and evaluate how much each of them contributes to the firm, the revenue versus the cost. Okay. Again, the widgets they produce sell for $1 a piece. So the revenue brought in by the first worker is $100. Right? The worker has increased product by 100 units. That means they've increased revenue by $100. Okay, adding a second worker increases revenue by $90, and so forth. Make sense? Okay. Now, the other side of this is to think for each worker. First, this is the marginal revenue of each worker. Okay, how much extra revenue the worker brings in. The other thing is the marginal cost. How much does it cost my firm to employ another worker? Well, each extra worker costs $75. So my firm thinks about this first worker. The worker adds $100 to revenue and adds $75 to cost. Is it beneficial to add this worker? Does that worker bring in more revenue than cost? Yes, right? Adds $100 to revenue, adds $75 to cost. It's a good idea. Second worker adds $90 to revenue, but adding another worker adds $75 to cost. So the second worker adds $90 to revenue, adds $75 to cost. Is it worth hiring that second worker? Yes. Okay. I hope this makes sense. So we can go down this list. First worker, second worker. The third worker brings in an extra $80, costs an extra $75, so it's cost effective to hire that third worker. But not the fourth worker. The fourth worker adds 70 to. It's okay. The fourth worker adds $70 to the revenue of the firm. Like adds or contributed 70 widgets to the product of the firm. So that's $70 of revenue, costs $75, not effective to hire that worker. Okay, so the firm is trying to make its decision how many workers to hire in order to maximize profits. It can simply evaluate the marginal impact of each extra worker, the marginal revenue versus the marginal cost. Marginal revenue, that's how much more revenue this worker contributes to the firm. Marginal cost is how much more this worker costs, how much they add to the costs. And that'll lead to a profit maximizing decision about, in this case, employment, how many workers to employ. Okay, so this is really the answer to all questions for all firms. I think every single question about a firm's behavior boils down to this, comparing marginal revenue to marginal cost. So when a firm has to make a decision about should it employ another worker, well, is the marginal revenue greater than the marginal cost? Should the firm cut back on the number of workers it employs? Again, marginal revenue versus marginal cost. Should the firm produce more widgets? Well, is the extra revenue brought in by selling more widgets greater than the costs of producing the extra widgets? Okay. It's always about marginal revenue versus marginal cost. So, got it? Okay. I'm just going to say this. This is what Mankiw refers to, I think, as the marginal principle. I think he calls it that name. But every decision a firm makes is about marginal revenue versus marginal cost. If the marginal revenue is greater than the marginal cost, do it. In fact, this is the way economists see the whole world. Every decision we make is about marginal benefit versus marginal cost. Should you study an extra hour for your test tomorrow? Well, what's the marginal benefit? How much will it raise my grade? And what's the marginal cost? What do I give up from an extra hour of studying? You're sitting down and you're eating pizza. Should you have another slice of pizza? Well, what's the marginal benefit and what's the marginal cost? What's the benefit of that extra slice? And what's the cost of that extra slice? And people just make every decision based on marginal benefit versus marginal cost. For the firm, our simple model is that all the firm cares about, all the benefits it cares about, are the revenue. Okay, so now we come to costs. Okay, I've kind of talked about the production side of things. There's also the cost side of things. Man, you all just can't see these slides, can you? I'm sorry about that. Okay, so costs. Okay, there are different ways that people think about costs. There's the way that normal people think about costs. Okay, we call these accounting costs. Okay, we economists call these accounting costs. The way a normal person thinks of a cost is that it is an exchange of money to use the good. Okay, exchange of money to use a good or a service. But a cost involves an exchange of money. Now, another term for this is an explicit cost. Okay, when you go to watch a movie in the movie theater, you think of the cost of watching the movie, or if you're thinking like a normal person, or economists would say an accountant, the cost of watching the movie is the price of the ticket. Okay? But an economist would say that's not a complete perspective of cost or on cost. Okay? The cost of watching a movie is not just the ticket, but also what? I mean, let's even back up. What does cost mean to an economist? The cost of something is what? Nolan? What you give up in order to enjoy it, in order to consume it. Okay. Yes, exactly. So when you go to watch the movie in the movie theater, you have to give up your $10 for the ticket. What else do you have to give up? Yeah, your time. Were you? Yeah, and even like a more complete perspective on this is it's not just your time, but what would you do with your time, right? You might be giving up studying for your test tomorrow. That's a big cost. Or you might be giving up going to a party, okay? Possibly a big cost. Or you might be giving up sitting around your dorm room for 2 hours, a smaller cost. Okay, really that's the complete perspective on cost, or a more complete perspective on cost. Okay, but yes, the cost of something is what you give up in order to use it. And, so, okay, I've got some of that outlined here on this slide that you can't read. Okay, to an economist, the cost is what you give up. Okay, and that can include money, which, as I said, is an explicit cost. Okay, the word explicit means clear, or stated directly and outright. If I say, for example, that so and so and I have an explicit agreement to do such and such, that means we've more or less written it down exactly what the terms of the agreement are. If I say we have an implicit agreement, that means there's still an agreement, except it's not firmly written down. It's just kind of an understanding. It is still an agreement, but it's not stated outright, clearly, directly. Okay, that's the difference between implicit and explicit. Okay, when it comes to costs, monetary costs are clear, explicit costs. But more generally, okay, there is the value of the alternative uses of resources owned by the firm, so of the firm's own resources. Okay, this is an opportunity cost. Okay, so think, for example, of a farmer who plants a crop on the farmer's own land using the farmer's own tractor and machinery and the farmer's own time. Okay? There are a couple of ways of thinking about costs in this situation. Okay? An accountant would say that the costs of growing a crop on the farmer's own land using the farmer's own machinery and time is very low. The farmer has to purchase seed and fertilizer and diesel for the tractor, and those are the only costs. An economist would say, whoa, you're using up some resources that could have been used in a different way. That land of yours, you could have rented it out to someone else. And so you're giving up rental income on your land. Your time. You could have been working in a different job, earning money, and by working on your own farm, you're giving up pay in that other job. Okay, so that's something else that you're giving up. Okay, it has an opportunity cost. Okay, the value of the alternative uses of the firm's own resources. Got it? Okay, and again, those are costs. And then a final cost is fair payment to the owners for use of capital. Okay. Now, in some ways, this goes. This is like saying the same or a more specific example of what I just said. Okay, but the owners of the firm need to be compensated for investing in the firm. Okay, let's move away from thinking of a farmer working on the farmer's own land. Instead, a farming company that purchases some land, purchases some machinery, and so forth. The people who purchased all of that stuff, the investors in the company, expect to get paid for purchasing all that stuff. If they don't get paid, then if they don't get, let me say, profit off this, then they will sell their share of the business and put their money into something that does generate a profit. Okay, now from the firm's perspective, this means that the firm needs to pay, let me say, a normal profit. Okay, or a normal return. In other words, paying out some profit is in fact a cost of doing business. If the owners of the firm could have put their money into a savings account earning 5% interest, for example, then the firm needs to pay them at least 5% profit for the money they invest in the firm in order to keep them happy. Yeah, Allie?
They can't hear you on Zoom right now.
Oh, the Zoom people cannot hear me? Okay, thank you for telling me. Okay, so quick recap. Costs. An economist would say the cost is everything you give up. And that includes the explicit costs, money, and so forth, like giving up money to acquire some input. But then there are also implicit costs. Okay. And these are these are mainly the opportunity cost, of using the firm's own inputs and paying a normal return to investors. Okay, a normal return to match the return they could get from investing their money somewhere else. Okay, like keeping the investors happy is a cost of doing business. Even though an accountant would say you're giving the investors profit, a certain amount of profit is expected by the investors, and that amount of profit is, to an economist, a cost of doing business. It's a cost of using their capital, what they invest in the company. Okay, moving along. Costs for the firm. Okay. Then, I talk about two different types of costs. Costs can be fixed costs or variable costs. Okay. Variable costs depend on how much is produced. Whereas fixed costs do not. Fixed costs are paid regardless of how much the firm produces. Okay, so imagine I am running, or imagine that I start a widget manufacturing business. In order to do that, I need to rent a factory where I produce my widgets, and I need to rent a store where I sell them. Those costs have nothing to do with how much I produce, or at a very simple level, don't have anything to do with how much I produce. Or think maybe more concretely about a restaurant. Okay? The cost of renting the restaurant is a fixed cost in that it doesn't depend on how much the firm produces, how many meals are served. Things like the cost of ingredients and labor are variable costs. The more the business is going to produce, the more ingredients and labor it needs. Okay? So you get the difference between fixed costs and variable costs? Okay. Fixed costs are paid even if the output of a firm is zero. You know, again, like the restaurant. It could, if it shuts down, it still has to pay the cost of rent or any other fixed costs. Okay. Variable costs, on the other hand, if it shuts down, it doesn't have to pay those. If the restaurant shuts down, it doesn't have to purchase ingredients. It doesn't have to pay for cooks and servers. Then the final thing is total cost. Total cost is fixed cost plus variable cost. Now, here's something I'm just going to have to warn you all about. You're going to see a lot of abbreviations, and in particular, you will see things like TC, FC, VC, MC. Okay, here's a little clue for you all. Whenever you see an abbreviation and the last letter is C, it stands for cost. Okay? Whenever you see an abbreviation and the first letter is M, it stands for marginal. Got it? If the first letter is A, it stands for average. Okay, so, become accustomed to seeing things like total costs, TC. If I'm referring to fixed costs, I'll write FC. Variable costs, marginal costs. Okay. If I'm talking about revenue and I write down MR, what does the M stand for? Marginal revenue. Okay. ATC. Average total cost. Okay, great. Have you taken this class before? Okay, yeah. So, but important thing is, for now, total cost equals fixed cost plus variable cost. Then we also do talk about average costs. Average costs means divided by output. Okay, the quantity produced. Okay, Q. Okay, so average total cost is total cost divided by the amount that the firm produces. If I tell you my firm's total costs are $1,000 and we produce 20 widgets, the average total cost is 1,000 divided by 20 equals 50. Okay, average total cost. And then average variable cost, average fixed cost, the same way. Okay, so where am I? Total cost, fixed. Now, I'm going to work through a mathematical example of costs. And this is sort of a hazing ritual or rite of passage for all econ courses, is you get to talk about all these different types of costs. Okay, so I'm going to start out with a cost function for a firm. This cost function relates the quantity. The cost function relates the quantity produced, so that's Q in this column, with the cost. Okay, so this is saying that if the firm produces 0, it pays a cost of $100. If it produces 1 widget, it pays a cost of, or its total costs of doing business are $150. Producing 2 widgets, the total costs are $210. So forth. Okay. Now from that, we can calculate a whole bunch of other costs. And I do expect you all to have the skills to complete this type of table from a cost function. Okay? So complete the fixed costs, variable costs, marginal costs, average total cost. Okay, so first, fixed cost. Fixed cost of doing business, or just being a firm, is $100. Okay, got it? Like the table says that the costs of producing 0 widgets is $100. That means that the firm has got to pay $100 even if it produces nothing. That's like the cost of renting the store or the factory. Okay, so $100 is the fixed cost. That stays the same regardless of how much is produced. Remember, that was the definition of fixed cost. So we can fill in this value all the way down. Okay? Fixed cost has nothing to do with how much is produced. It's got a $100 fixed cost. Okay. Next step for this table is the variable cost. Remember, the variable cost depends on how much is produced. And variable cost is 0 when the firm produces nothing. And the variable cost is everything above the fixed cost. So, like, variable cost when producing one widget is 150 is the total cost. $100 of that was fixed cost. So there's $50 of variable cost when producing the first widget. When producing the second widget, the variable cost is everything except for the fixed cost. So has a cost of $210. 100 of that was the fixed cost, so the variable cost is 110. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Third widget. Total cost is 280, and the fixed cost is 100. What's the variable cost? Yeah. What? 180. Yeah. Okay. Producing 4, the variable cost is, okay, Natalie? 260. Good. Okay. Producing 5, I mean, total cost when it produces 5 is 450. 100 of that was just the fixed cost. So the variable cost is 350. Okay. When producing the sixth widget, variable cost is 450. Okay. So fixed cost, I mean, that's just how much the firm has to pay even if it produces nothing. Then the variable cost is how much it pays that depends on the level of production. Okay? It's the difference between total cost and fixed cost. The next thing for this table is the marginal cost. That is how much the cost of the firm, total cost increases when the output of the firm increases by 1. Okay? So when the firm increased output from 0 to 1. By the way, I just put a slash through the first spot here because it's always talking about how much how much cost increases. Like 0 doesn't count. It can't increase to 0. Okay, we're talking about, for this first spot, how much the cost increased when the firm went from producing 0 to producing 1. So when the firm goes from producing 0 to producing 1, cost increased from 100 to 150. So 150 minus 100 is $50. Producing one widget, or producing the first widget, added $50 to the firm's costs. Okay. Producing the second widget raised the costs from 150 to 210. So it raised the costs by $60. Okay. Again, raised the costs to 210 from 150. Okay. Then increasing production from 2 to 3 increased the costs from 210 to 280. So the marginal cost of the third widget is Nolan. increasing production from 2 to 3 caused the cost to increase how much? Yeah. Natalie will help you if you'd like. 70, okay? Yeah. So 280 is the cost of producing 3 widgets. Cost of producing 2 widgets was 210. So producing the 3rd widget added $70 to the firm's costs. Okay. Increasing production from 3 to 4 raises costs by 360 minus 280 equals $80. Okay. Marginal cost of the 5th widget, okay. 450 minus 360 is $90. The 6th widget increases the cost of production from 450 to 550, so 100. Okay, marginal cost. How much costs increase when producing this extra unit? The final thing to put in this table are average total costs. Okay, this is total cost divided by the number produced. Okay, average total cost when producing 0, let's say that's undefined or infinitely large. Average cost of producing a widget when the firm produces 1 widget at a total cost of $150, it is an average cost of 150 divided by 1, 150. When producing 2 widgets at a total cost of $210, the average cost per widget is 105. 210 divided by 2. Okay. 210 divided by 2 is $105. The 3rd widget, or when producing 3 widgets, the firm's total costs are $280. Divide that by the number produced. 280 divided by 3 is, and then you get some answer here. What is that, 93 1/3? I believe, okay, increasing for, well, sorry, not increasing so much as just for the 4th widget, total cost of producing 4 widgets is $360. So dividing 360 by 4, average cost is 90. Average cost of producing 5 widgets. Well, to produce 5 widgets, it costs $450. Divided by 5 is 90. When producing 6 widgets, average cost is 550 divided by 6, which is 91 and something. 91.67, I think. Okay. Average total cost. Got it? Okay. Take the total cost, divide by the number produced, and you have the average cost per widget. Okay. Anything else I should say today?